She's too fat to be anybody's wife. The words cut through Black Ash Ridge's town square like a whip crack. 10 women stood on that platform, pretty faces painted with hope, while the crowd whispered about the legendary cowboy come to choose a bride. But Ronan Vale's eyes didn't land where everyone expected. They landed on her, Mira Holloway, the seamstress they'd laughed at for years, the woman they said no man would ever want. What happened next tore that frontier town apart and proved that the cruelest lies are the ones we're taught to believe about ourselves. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust never settled in Black Ash Ridge. It hung in the air like judgment, coating everything. The warped wooden storefronts, the horses tied outside the saloon, the faces of people who'd learned long ago that survival mattered more than kindness. This was frontier country, 1876, where the land was cheap because staying alive on it wasn't. Mira Holloway kept her eyes down as she walked past the mercantile, her sewing basket tucked against her side. She'd learned that trick years ago. Don't look up. Don't meet their eyes. Don't give them another reason to notice you. The morning sun was already brutal, turning Main Street into a corridor of heat and whispered cruelty. Lord have mercy, is she getting bigger? The voice came from near the hardware store. Mira's fingers tightened on her basket handle, but she didn't break stride. Mrs. Pritchard, the banker's wife, never missed an opportunity. I heard she ate an entire pie at the church social last month. A whole pie, Margaret, by herself. Well, someone had to eat it. No man's going to be looking at her across the dinner table. Laughter followed Mira down the street like a pack of dogs. She'd stopped crying over it when she was 16. Now, at 24, she just moved through it like cold water. Miserable while it lasted, but survivable. The seamstress shop sat at the edge of town, a crooked building that leaned slightly west, like it was trying to escape into the desert. Mira had rented the back room for 3 years, ever since Mrs. Chen decided she was too old to thread needles anymore. The work was solitary, repetitive, and exactly what Mira needed. Fabric didn't judge. Stitches didn't whisper. She pushed through the door and set her basket on the cutting table. 3 dresses needed hemming by Friday. Mrs. Patterson's daughter was getting married. Thin, blonde Sarah Patterson, who'd once told Mira at a town dance that it was inspiring how she still showed up to events despite everything. Mira had smiled and thanked her because what else do you do when someone weaponizes kindness? The morning passed in the rhythm of needle and thread. Mira's hands were her best feature, everyone said. Small, precise, capable of turning rough cloth into something beautiful. She'd made her peace with being valuable only for what she could create, not for what she was. Around noon, the bell above the shop door rattled. We're closed for... Mira looked up and stopped. Esther Young stood in the doorway, breathless and flushed. Esther was 18, pretty in that uncomplicated way that meant life hadn't gotten complicated yet. She worked at her father's boarding house and had always been kind to Mira, which made her something rare. Mira, you have to come to the square right now. I have 3 dresses to finish. Forget the dresses. Esther grabbed Mira's wrist, her eyes bright with something between excitement and panic. There's a man here, Ronan Vale. He's one of those cowboys everyone talks about, the ones who clear land and fight off claim jumpers and make something out of nothing. He came to Black Ash looking for a wife. Mira's stomach dropped. She pulled her hand back. Then he should talk to you or Mary Henderson or any of the dozen girls who actually... He wants to meet all the unmarried women, all of them. Mayor Stubbs is gathering everyone in the square in an hour. Esther's voice dropped. Mira, this might be the only chance you ever get. The words hung between them, honest and brutal. Mira turned back to her sewing. I'm not going to humiliate myself so people can laugh at me standing next to actual prospects. Tell them I'm busy. What if he picks you? Men like that don't pick women like me, Esther. You know that. Everyone knows that. But Esther didn't leave. She stood there, worrying the edge of her shawl, until finally she said quietly, My mama always told me that refusing to show up is just another way of letting them win. Mira's needle stopped mid-stitch. "I'm not going," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. By the time Mira reached the town square, half of Black Ash Ridge had already gathered. A wooden platform had been erected in front of the mayor's office, the same platform they used for auctions and announcements, and once a public whipping that Mira still had nightmares about. 10 women stood on that platform, arranged like merchandise. They wore their best dresses, their hair pinned and curled, their faces bright with desperate hope. Mira recognized most of them: Sarah Patterson in pale blue, Mary Henderson in yellow, the Morrison twins in matching green. All of them young, all of them pretty, all of them exactly what a man would want. Mira stood at the back of the crowd, half hidden behind the Johnsons' wagon. She told herself she was just curious. She told herself she'd leave before anyone noticed. Then the crowd parted and Ronan Vale stepped into view. He wasn't what Mira expected. The stories painted men like him as giants, rough-edged and wild, more legend than flesh. But Ronan was just a man, tall, yes, broad-shouldered and sun-dark, but there was something careful in the way he moved. He wore plain clothes, dark trousers and a worn shirt, a hat that had seen better days. His face was hard angles and old scars, the kind earned from work and weather, not barroom brawls. But it was his eyes that caught Mira, dark, watchful, measuring everything and giving nothing away. Mayor Stubbs, a soft-bellied man who loved the sound of his own voice, stepped forward with theatrical flair. "Mr. Vale, on behalf of Black Ash Ridge, we welcome you. These fine young women represent the best our community has to offer. Take your time, look them over, ask whatever you need to ask." Ronan didn't respond immediately. He walked along the platform slowly, studying each woman with the same intensity he might give a horse he was considering buying. The comparison made Mira's skin crawl. Sarah Patterson smiled and straightened her shoulders. Mary Henderson tilted her chin up, letting the sunlight catch her auburn hair. Each woman presented herself like a painting, hoping to be the masterpiece he chose. Ronan stopped in front of Sarah. "What's your name?" "Sarah Patterson, sir. My father owns the dry goods store." "Can you shoot?" Sarah blinked. I'm sorry." "A rifle. Can you shoot one?" I've never had occasion to." Ronan moved on before she finished. He stopped in front of Mary Henderson. "What about you?" Mary smiled, sweet and practiced. "Mary Henderson. I can cook, clean, and I've been told I have a lovely singing voice. Can you ride a horse for 6 hours without complaint?" Mary's smile faltered. 6 hours. I don't. Can you deliver a breech calf at midnight in a storm? That's not. I don't understand what you're. Ronan moved again, working his way down the line. Each question was stranger than the last, more practical and less concerned with charm. Can you set a broken bone? Can you fire a warning shot in the dark? Can you go 3 days on jerky and hard bread without crying about it? The woman stumbled through answers, their rehearsed grace collapsing under questions they'd never prepared for. The crowd began murmuring, confused and uncomfortable. That's when Ronan reached the end of the platform and stopped. He turned back toward Mayor Stubbs, his expression unreadable. "These all of them?" Stubbs puffed up. "These are our finest young women, Mr. Vale. Any one of them would make an excellent—" I asked if these were all of them. The mayor hesitated. "Well, yes, the unmarried women of appropriate age and standing." Ronan's gaze swept the crowd, methodical and thorough. Mira felt the moment his eyes found her, felt the weight of that attention like a hand on her shoulder. "What about her?" The square went silent. Mira's heart stopped. Every head turned. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the dirt and vanish. Mayor Stubbs followed Ronan's gaze, and his face did something complicated. Surprise, then confusion, then barely concealed disgust. "That's Mr. Vale. That's just Mira Holloway. She's a seamstress. She's not part of—" "Is she unmarried?" Yes, but is she of age? I don't see what that has to do with. Then she should be on that platform. The murmur that went through the crowd was ugly. Mira heard laughter, sharp and mean. Someone near the front said loud enough to carry, "Maybe he needs someone who can pull a plow." More laughter. Ronan didn't react to it. He just stood there, waiting. Mayor Stubbs cleared his throat. "Mr. Vale, I don't think you understand. Mira is, well, she's not suitable for—" "Let her decide that." Ronan's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through every other sound. "Miss Holloway, come up here." Mira couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. Every eye in Black Ash Ridge was on her, and the weight of it was crushing. Esther appeared at her elbow, gripping her arm. "Go," she whispered. "You have to go." "I can't." "Yes, you can." Somehow, Mira's feet started moving. The crowd didn't part for her. She had to push through, feeling their stares like brands on her skin. The walk to that platform was the longest of her life. When she climbed the steps, the other woman shifted away from her like she carried disease. Sarah Patterson's face was a mask of disbelief. Mary Henderson looked personally offended. Mira stood at the end of the line, her hands clasped in front of her, and forced herself to breathe. Ronan approached her the same way he'd approached the others, direct, assessing, impossible to read. "Your name's Mira Holloway?" "Yes." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "You work as a seamstress?" "Yes." "You live alone?" "I rent a room behind the shop." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "Can you read?" "Yes." "Write?" "Yes." "Do arithmetic?" "Better than most." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You scared of hard work?" Mira met his eyes. "I've been working since I was 8 years old. I'm not scared of work." "You scared of being alone?" The question landed differently than the others. Mira thought about her room behind the shop, about the silence that filled her evenings, about the way loneliness had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. "No," she said, "I'm used to it." Ronan studied her for another long moment. Then he turned to Mayor Stubbs. "I'll take her." The square exploded. It wasn't just surprise, it was outrage, confusion, disbelief, all tangled together. Women gasped. Men shouted. Sarah Patterson made a sound like she'd been slapped. Mayor Stubbs sputtered. "Mr. Vale, surely you want to take more time to consider." "I've considered. Miss Holloway, I have a ranch about 8 miles northwest of here. It's rough country, hard living. I need a partner who can work, think, and not fall apart when things get bad. You interested?" Mira's mind reeled. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I don't understand. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." He glanced at the crowd, then back at her. "I know every person here spent the last hour pretending you didn't exist. I know you walked up here anyway. That tells me more than any pretty speech about cooking and singing." Mrs. Pritchard's voice cut through the noise. "This is absurd. Ronan Vale, you're making a terrible mistake. That girl is That woman," Ronan said, his voice going hard, "is the only one here who answered my questions honestly. The rest of you have been performing like trained horses. I need someone real." He turned back to Mira. "I'm offering marriage, not romance, not rescue, partnership. You work, I work. We build something worth keeping. You'll have your own space, your own say in how things run. I won't touch you unless you want me to, but I need an answer now." Mira looked at the faces around her, the shock, the fury, the undisguised contempt. She thought about her room behind the shop, about years of whispers and sideways glances, about growing old in a town that had never wanted her. She thought about what Esther's mother had said. Refusing to show up is just another way of letting them win. "Yes," Mira heard herself say, "I'll marry you." The crowd erupted again, but Mira barely heard it. Ronan nodded once, then offered his hand. When she took it, his grip was warm and calloused and steady. "We'll leave in the morning," he said. "Pack what matters, leave the rest." Mira didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of her room, surrounded by everything she owned, which wasn't much. 2 dresses, a coat, a pair of boots that still had some life left, her sewing kit, her mother's thimble, a book of poetry she'd bought with her first wages. Everything fit into one bag. Outside, Black Ash Ridge settled into its usual evening rhythms. The saloon piano played, dogs barked. Life continued like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. There was a knock at her door around midnight. Mira opened it to find Esther, still dressed, her face worried. "I had to see you before you left." Mira let her in. They sat on the narrow bed, shoulders touching. "Everyone's talking," Esther said. "Mrs. Pritchard called an emergency meeting at the church. They're saying terrible things, Mira. They're saying he must be desperate or crazy, that he'll regret it, that you—" She stopped herself. "That I what?" "That you tricked him somehow. That you'll ruin him?" Mira laughed, bitter and sharp. "Yes, I've been secretly practicing my seduction techniques between hemming dresses. Very dangerous, me." "I don't believe any of it." Esther grabbed her hand. "I think he saw something none of them did. I think you're braver than anyone in this town, and I think you're going to prove them all wrong." Mira wanted to believe that, but 8 years of cruelty had taught her that hope was just another way to get hurt. "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly. "What if he realizes he made a mistake? What if I get out there and I'm not strong enough, not useful enough? What if you're exactly what he needs and he's exactly what you need?" They sat in silence for a while, holding on to each other like shipwreck survivors. When Esther finally left, Mira stood at her window and looked out at Black Ash Ridge. The town that had raised her, mocked her, tolerated her existence, but never celebrated it. Tomorrow she would leave it behind. She didn't know if she was riding towards something better or something worse. But at least she was riding. PG. Ronan arrived at dawn with 2 horses and a pack mule. He'd spent the night at the boarding house, and according to Esther, who'd brought Mira some bread and cheese for the journey, he'd ignored every attempt at conversation from the other guests. Mira stepped outside with her single bag, and Ronan's eyes went to it, then to her face. "That's all?" "That's all I need." He nodded and secured her bag to the mule. Then he helped her onto one of the horses, a sturdy mare with gentle eyes. Mira wasn't an experienced rider, but she knew enough not to fall off. A small crowd had gathered to watch them leave, not to wish them well, just to witness the spectacle. Mayor Stubbs was there, looking like he'd sucked on a lemon. Mrs. Pritchard stood with her arms crossed, her expression triumphant, as if their departure proved something. Sarah Patterson stood near the back, her face a careful blank, but her eyes followed Ronan with something raw and bitter. Ronan swung onto his horse and glanced at Mira. "Ready?" "No," she wanted to say. "I'm not ready. I'm scared, and I don't know what I'm doing, and this might be the worst decision I've ever made." But she said, "Yes." They rode out of Black Ash Ridge as the sun climbed over the eastern hills. Mira didn't look back. The land changed as they traveled northwest. The scrubby desert gave way to rolling grassland, then to rocky terrain dotted with juniper and pinon pine. The sky stretched impossibly wide, unmarked by buildings or people or judgment. Ronan didn't talk much. He pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that ran during spring snowmelt, the boundary of his land. Mira listened and tried to remember everything. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses. Ronan handed Mira jerky and a canteen, then sat on a flat rock and studied the horizon. "You scared?" he asked without looking at her. "Terrified." "Good. People who aren't scared don't pay attention." He glanced at her. "You'll be all right. You're tougher than you think." "You don't know that." "I know you survived 8 years in that town. That takes more strength than most people have." Mira turned the jerky over in her hands. "Why did you choose me? Really?" Ronan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "I've built 3 ranches from nothing, lost 2 to drought and bad luck. The third one, the one we're riding to, is barely holding on. I need help, real help. Not someone who'll cry when things get hard or run back to town when the work gets ugly." He looked at her directly. Those women on that platform, they were performing, playing parts. You weren't. I wasn't playing anything. I was just trying not to die of embarrassment. Exactly. You were real. That's rarer than you think. They rode on. The ranch appeared in late afternoon, nestled in a valley between two low ridges. It wasn't much. A main house that needed repairs, a barn with a sagging roof, a few outbuildings in various states of collapse. Fences ran in crooked lines across brown grass. A windmill stood silent, its blades unmoving. It was the most beautiful thing Mira had ever seen. Ronan dismounted and helped her down. Her legs were shaky from hours in the saddle, but she managed to stay upright. "It's not much," he said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "The drought's been hard, lost most of the herd last year, been trying to rebuild, but—" He stopped himself. "Anyway, you'll have the bedroom. I've been sleeping in the barn." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. We made an agreement. You get your own space." He showed her around, the house with its rough furniture and bare walls, the barn with its 3 remaining cows, the well that was running lower each week. Everything needed work. Everything was held together with desperation and determination. Mira's room was small but clean, a bed, a chair, a window that looked west toward the mountains. Ronan had left wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. The gesture was so unexpected that Mira felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she managed to say. Ronan nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mira, I meant what I said yesterday. This is a partnership. Your opinions matter. Your work matters. You're not here to serve me. You're here to build something with me. Understand?" "I'm not sure I do," Mira admitted, "but I want to try. That's all I'm asking." The first week was brutal. Mira had worked hard her entire life, but ranch work was different. It was relentless, physical, punishing in ways that sewing never was. She learned to milk cows with hands that cramped and ached. She learned to muck stalls until her back screamed. She learned to carry water from the well until her shoulders felt like they'd separate from her body. Ronan worked beside her, never asking her to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He was patient when she made mistakes, matter of fact when she struggled. He didn't coddle her, but he didn't mock her either. At night, Mira collapsed into bed too exhausted to think. But slowly, something began to shift. Her body, soft from years of sedentary work, started to change. Her arms grew stronger. Her breathing came easier. She could carry 2 water buckets instead of 1. She could work through the morning without needing to rest, and the silence, the vast, empty silence of the ranch, stopped feeling lonely and started feeling like peace. Ronan talked more as the days passed, not about feelings or the past, but about practical things. He taught her to read weather signs, to recognize when a cow was sick, to repair fence wire without cutting her hands to ribbons. He explained the water situation, how the creek that used to run through the property had dried up, how they were dependent on the well, how every rancher in the territory was fighting over what little water remained. "There's a syndicate," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Eastern investors. They've been buying up struggling ranchers, consolidating water rights. They made me an offer last year. I turned them down. Why? Because this is mine. I built it. I'm not handing it over to men who've never worked a day of honest labor in their lives." His jaw tightened. They weren't happy about it. Are they dangerous? They're rich. That's more dangerous than guns. Mira processed this. "How long can you hold out?" "Honestly, I don't know. If the drought doesn't break, if the well runs dry." He didn't finish the sentence. They sat in silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Mira thought about Black Ash Ridge, about the life she'd left behind. She thought about the woman who'd stood on that platform, probably married to local boys by now, settling into predictable lives. She didn't miss it. Not even a little. "Ronan," she said quietly, "thank you for choosing me." He looked at her, surprised. "You're thanking me? You're the one working yourself half to death out here." I'm thanking you because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw something other than a problem to ignore. Her voice wavered. That matters. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, those people in that town, they looked at you and saw what they expected to see. They didn't look hard enough to see what was actually there. What's actually there? Someone strong, someone smart, someone who doesn't quit. He stood up, stretching his shoulders. Get some rest. Tomorrow we're fixing the windmill. It's going to be a bastard of a job. He walked toward the barn, and Mira sat alone on the porch, looking up at stars that seemed closer out here, brighter, like the sky was trying to make up for all the darkness below. Maybe, she thought, maybe this could work. Maybe she wasn't the mistake everyone said she was. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where she could belong. The windmill fought them for 3 days straight. Ronan had been right about it being a bastard of a job. The mechanism was rusted, the blades warped from years of wind and neglect, and the whole structure groaned like it wanted to collapse and take them with it. Mira held the ladder while Ronan climbed, passing him tools when he called for them, learning words she'd never heard in polite company. Wrench, he barked from 20 feet up. She handed it to him. No, the other one. The bigger, yeah, that one. The sun beat down without mercy. Sweat ran down Mira's back, soaking through her dress. Her arms trembled from holding the ladder steady, but she didn't let go. This whole damn gear assembly's shot, Ronan muttered, half to himself. Need to fabricate a new one. But that means riding into Dalton Creek for parts, which means spending money we don't have on supplies we can't afford. Can you patch it? I can try. Won't hold forever, but it might buy us time. He worked for another hour while Mira's shoulders screamed. When he finally climbed down, his hands were bleeding from a dozen small cuts, rust and grease smeared up to his elbows. That's enough for today, he said, wiping his face with his sleeve. We'll hit it again tomorrow. Mira wanted to collapse right there in the dirt, but instead she said, show me what you did up there. I want to understand how it works. Ronan looked at her, surprised. Why? Because next time something breaks, I want to know how to fix it. Something shifted in his expression. Respect maybe, or the beginning of it. He spent the next hour explaining the windmill's mechanics, drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick, pointing out which parts mattered and which were just for show. Mira absorbed every word, filing it away alongside everything else she'd learned about wells and water pressure and how to keep things running when they wanted to quit. That night, her hands were so sore she could barely hold a fork. Ronan noticed. You did good today, he said across the table. They'd fallen into a routine of eating dinner together, simple meals, usually whatever Mira could coax from their dwindling supplies. Tonight it was beans and cornbread, neither prepared with any skill, but hot and filling. I didn't do anything except stand there. You stood there for 6 hours without complaining. That's more than most people could manage. He pushed back from the table. I'm going to check the fence line tomorrow. Western section's been looking weak. You want to come or stay here? Come with you, Mira said immediately. The thought of staying alone at the ranch all day made her uneasy, though she couldn't say why. Ronan nodded. We'll leave at first light. The next morning broke cool and clear, the kind of dawn that promised brutal heat by noon. They saddled the horses in comfortable silence. Mira had gotten better at it, her movements more confident, even if they weren't graceful. Ronan loaded supplies onto the pack mule. Fence wire, tools, water, and his rifle. You expecting trouble? Mira asked, eyeing the weapon. Always expect trouble. That way you're ready when it shows up. They rode west, following fence lines that stretched across land so empty it hurt to look at. The drought had turned everything brittle and brown. What should have been grassland looked like the floor of an old fireplace, grey and dead and used up. It wasn't always like this, Ronan said, reading her thoughts. 5 years ago this whole valley was green. Creek ran year-round. You could graze 200 head easy. Now look at it. Will it come back? Maybe, if the rains return, if the wells don't run dry first. He shifted in his saddle. That syndicate I told you about, they're betting it won't. They're buying up land cheap, waiting for people like me to give up. But you're not giving up. Not yet. They worked through the morning, repairing breaks in the fence, tightening wire, replacing posts that had rotted through. It was mind-numbing work, repetitive and endless. But Mira found a strange satisfaction in it. Every fence post made solid was one small thing wrested back from chaos. Around midday, Ronan stiffened in his saddle. His hand moved toward the rifle. "What is it?" Mira asked quietly. "Riders. 3 of them, coming from the north." Mira followed his gaze and saw them. 3 men on horseback, moving at an easy pace. They wore suits, completely wrong for ranch country, and their horses were too clean, too well fed. "Who are they?" "Trouble," Ronan said flatly. He swung down from his horse and pulled the rifle free, not pointing it at anyone yet, but making sure it was visible. "Stay behind me." The riders approached and stopped about 20 feet away. The man in the middle was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of face that came from never missing a meal. His smile was practiced and false. "Mr. Vale," he called out, friendly as a snake. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "State your business, Hammond." So this was Hammond. Mira had heard Ronan mention the name with the kind of contempt usually reserved for rats and politicians. Now, is that any way to greet a neighbor? I was just riding through, checking on my properties, and I thought I'd stop by, see how you're managing. Hammond's eyes drifted to Mira, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "And who's this? I heard you got yourself a wife. Quite the surprise to everyone back in Black Ash Ridge. My wife's not your concern." Of course, just being friendly." Hammond's smile never wavered. "But since I'm here, I thought I'd extend my previous offer. The drought's not getting better, Ronan. Your well's dropping. I can see it from here. Your livestock look thin. Your land's dying. Why suffer through it when you could walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere easier? I already gave you my answer. That was 6 months ago. Circumstances change. Pride's expensive, friend. Sometimes it costs everything." Ronan's grip on the rifle tightened. "You're on my land, Hammond. You've got 30 seconds to state your real business or turn around." The 2 men flanking Hammond shifted in their saddles. They weren't wearing suits. Working clothes, gun belts low on their hips, the kind of men you hired when words stopped working. Hammond's smile finally faded. "My business is simple. This land's going to be mine one way or another. You can take my money and leave with dignity, or you can wait until the drought finishes what I started and lose everything. Your choice." "What you started?" Mira spoke before she could stop herself. All 3 men turned to look at her like they'd forgotten she could talk. Hammond's expression turned patronizing. "Ma'am, this is business, complex business. Why don't you head back to the house and let the men—" "She stays," Ronan cut in, his voice sharp as broken glass. "And she hears every word. Now explain what you meant by what I started." Hammond's facade of friendliness evaporated. The drought's natural veil. "I'm just helping it along. You want to prove otherwise, you're welcome to try, but I've got lawyers and money and connections you can't touch. So let me spell this out. Sell now, or watch everything you built turn to dust." The threat hung in the air like smoke. One of Hammond's hired men rested his hand on his pistol, not drawing it, just making sure everyone noticed it was there. Ronan raised his rifle an inch. Not aiming, not yet, but the message was clear. "Get off my land," he said quietly, "and don't come back." For a moment, Mira thought it would turn into something uglier. Hammond's face went red, his jaw tight with rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was outgunned, for now. "You're making a mistake," he said, yanking his horse's reins. "When this place fails, and it will fail, don't come crying to me." They rode off, kicking up dust. Ronan didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared over the ridge. "What did he mean about helping the drought along?" Mira asked, her voice shaking slightly. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words came out careful and measured. "About 3 months ago, the creek that used to run through my property changed course. just dried up overnight. At first I thought it was natural. Creeks shift during drought. But then I started hearing stories. Other small ranches losing water access. Wells running dry ahead of schedule. And every time it happened, Hammond's syndicate showed up within the week making offers. You think he's sabotaging people's water? I think Hammond's the kind of man who'd burn down a forest to sell the charcoal. Ronan slid the rifle back into its saddle holster. But thinking it and proving it are different things. And even if I could prove it, who'd I tell? The sheriff in Dalton Creek's on Hammond's payroll, the territorial marshal's 300 miles away, and doesn't give a damn about ranch disputes. Mira stared at the horizon where Hammond had disappeared. So he just gets away with it. So far. Ronan swung back onto his horse. Come on, let's finish this fence line before it gets too hot. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, but Mira's mind churned. She thought about Hammond's smug certainty, about the hired guns on his flanks, about the way he'd looked at the dying land like it was already his. She thought about everything Ronan had told her about the water situation, about the creek that vanished, about wells running dry ahead of schedule. Something bothered her, scratching at the back of her thoughts like a persistent itch, but she couldn't quite grab hold of it. That night, after dinner, Mira stood outside and stared up at the dark ridge to the north, the ridge where the old creek used to flow, the ridge where water had once run year-round and now ran never. Can't sleep? Ronan's voice came from behind her. Just thinking. About Hammond? About water. She turned to face him. That creek you mentioned, the one that dried up, where did it start? Up in the mountains. Snow melt feeds it, fed it every spring, ran down through a canyon across my property, then continued south towards the valley. And it just stopped? Just stopped. One day it was running low, but steady. Next day, nothing. Mira chewed her lip, thinking. Could it have been blocked, upstream I mean, before it reached your land? I thought of that, rode up there to check, didn't find anything obvious. No rock slide, no beaver dam, nothing. Creek bed was just dry. But you didn't go all the way to the source. Ronan hesitated. No, it's a hard ride, rough terrain, and I couldn't spare that much time away from the ranch. Why? Because if Hammond's manipulating water access, he's doing it somewhere people won't look, somewhere difficult to reach. She met his eyes. We should go check, really check, all the way up. That's a 2-day ride minimum through country that'll break your neck if you're not careful. And even if we find something, even if Hammond's behind it, we still have the same problem. No one to tell who will do anything about it. Maybe we don't need to tell anyone, Mira said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. Maybe we just need to understand what he did and then undo it. Ronan stared at her. You're talking about sabotaging whatever Hammond built. I'm talking about restoring what was naturally yours. A smile tugged at the corner of Ronan's mouth. The first real smile Mira had seen from him. You know, when I picked you off that platform, I thought I was getting someone practical and smart. I didn't realize I was getting someone reckless too. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Haven't decided yet. He rubbed his jaw, thinking. The ranch can't spare both of us for 2 days, but I could ride up alone, scout it out. No, Mira said firmly. We're partners, remember? You said my opinions matter, my work matters. So we do this together or not at all. Ronan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Finally he nodded. All right, we'll need to prepare supplies, camping gear, weapons, and we'll need to leave the livestock enough water to last. That means hauling from the well tomorrow, filling every trough and barrel. Then let's get started. They spent the next day preparing. Mira had never worked harder in her life, hauling water until her shoulders went numb, packing supplies with military precision, checking and rechecking every detail. Ronan moved through it all with grim determination, and Mira realized this was how he approached everything, methodically, thoroughly, refusing to accept failure as inevitable. That evening, as they loaded the last of the supplies, Esther appeared at the ranch entrance on a borrowed horse, looking exhausted and worried. Mira! She slid down from the saddle and ran forward. I had to warn you, there's talk in town, bad talk. People are saying Hammond visited you, that there's going to be trouble. Mrs. Pritchard's been spreading rumors that you've brought bad luck to Ronan, that his ranch is failing because... She stopped herself, but the implication hung heavy. Because he married me, Mira finished quietly. It's not true. Everyone knows the drought's hitting everyone, but people believe what they want to believe, and they want to believe you're the problem. Esther grabbed Mira's hands. I'm scared for you. Hammond's dangerous. He's bought off half the territory. If he wants this ranch... He's not getting it, Ronan said, stepping out of the barn, and Mira's got nothing to do with the drought or Hammond or any of it. People want a convenient scapegoat. They can blame the weather like sensible folks. Esther looked between them. Where are you going? I saw the supplies packed for travel. Reconnaissance, Ronan said simply. We'll be back in 3 days, 4 at most. Let me help. I can stay here, watch the animals. No, Ronan said, but not unkindly. If Hammond's watching this place, I don't want anyone else caught in the crossfire. You head back to town. Don't tell anyone you were here. Esther hugged Mira tightly. Be careful, both of you. After she left, Mira and Ronan finished their preparations in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too beautiful for the ugliness they were riding into. You scared? Ronan asked, echoing his question from weeks ago. Yes, Mira admitted, but I'm going anyway. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Stupidity gets you killed. They left before dawn, riding north toward the mountains that loomed like broken teeth against the lightening sky. The land climbed steadily, the air growing cooler as they ascended. By midday, they'd left the grassland behind entirely, riding through juniper forest that smelled sharp and clean. Ronan knew the country, navigating by landmarks invisible to Mira, a lightning-struck tree here, a distinctive rock formation there. They stopped rarely, pushing hard to cover ground before nightfall. How much further? Mira asked, as the sun began its descent. Maybe 6 more miles to where the creek should be running. We'll camp there tonight, start searching upstream in the morning. But when they reached the creek bed an hour later, Ronan pulled his horse up short. Mira stopped beside him, staring at what should have been flowing water. The creek was completely dry, not just low, completely absent. The stones in the stream bed were dusty, bleached by sun, decorated with dead leaves that had accumulated over months. No water had flowed here in a long time. It's worse than I thought, Ronan muttered. He swung down and walked along the creek bed, studying the ground with the intensity of a man reading scripture. After a few minutes he called back, Mira, come look at this. She dismounted and joined him. He was crouched beside a section of the creek bed, pointing to marks in the dried mud. See these? Tool marks. Someone's been digging here. Mira looked closer. He was right. The disturbance pattern was too regular to be natural. What were they digging for? Not digging, diverting. Ronan stood, following the marks with his eyes. The creek bed continues north, but these marks head northwest. Someone redirected the water. They followed the tool marks as the light failed, eventually losing them in rocky terrain. By the time they made camp, full dark had fallen. They didn't risk a fire, too visible, so they ate cold food and spoke in low voices. We'll find where it goes tomorrow, Ronan said. If we can trace the diversion back to its source, we might be able to undo it. And if Hammond has men guarding it, then it gets complicated. Mira wrapped her blanket tighter against the mountain cold. Ronan, why did you really build this ranch? You could have homesteaded anywhere. Why that particular valley? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, remembering. I grew up in Texas. My father was a farmer, worked himself to death on land that never gave back what he put into it. Watched him break himself for nothing. I swore I'd never be that, never be someone who just accepts what he's given and hopes for mercy. He paused. I came west looking for land I could shape, could make into something mine. That valley called to me. Good water, good grass, room to build. I thought if I could make it work there, I'd finally prove I was more than my father's failed legacy. You have nothing to prove. Everyone's got something to prove, even you. Mira thought about that. What am I trying to prove? That you matter, that you're more than what they said you were. The words hit harder than Mira expected. She pulled her blanket up to her chin and stared at the stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Is it working? She asked quietly. Am I proving it? You rode out here to fight for land that isn't technically yours, to face down a man with money and guns and power. You're hauling water and fixing windmills and learning to survive in country that kills people who aren't paying attention. Ronan's voice was firm in the darkness. Yeah, Mira, it's working. She fell asleep with his words warm in her chest, and for the first time since childhood she didn't dream of people laughing. They woke before dawn and continued north, following the faint traces of Hammond's diversion. The terrain grew rougher, the path steeper. Mira's legs ached from gripping the horse, her hands raw from the reins, but she didn't complain and Ronan didn't slow down. Around noon they found it. The creek emerged from a narrow canyon, running clear and strong, but instead of following its natural course south, it had been redirected through a crude channel carved into rock. The channel led northwest, away from Ronan's property, toward a land that, according to Ronan's description, belonged to Hammond's syndicate. That son of a bitch, Ronan breathed. He didn't just block the water, he stole it, rerouted an entire creek to feed his own holdings. Mira dismounted and walked along the diversion channel. It was clever work, not immediately obvious, disguised to look almost natural unless you knew what you were looking for. But once you saw it, the manipulation was clear. Can we undo it? She asked. Ronan studied the setup, walking the length of the diversion, testing the rock, measuring angles with his eyes. Maybe. The channel's cut into solid rock. We can't fill it. But if we could block it somehow, force the water back to its natural course. With what? Rocks, timber, whatever we can move. We'd need to build a dam here. He pointed to where the diversion split from the natural creek bed. Strong enough to withstand water pressure. It won't be permanent, but it might hold long enough to get flow back to my land. And when Hammond discovers it, he'll tear it down. But every day we have water is another day we survive. That's all we can ask for right now. They spent the rest of the day gathering materials. Rocks from a nearby slope. Fallen trees from a lightning-struck grove. It was back-breaking work, hauling stone and timber, wedging them into place, trying to create a barrier that would redirect water without simply washing away. Mira's muscles screamed, her hands bled. She slipped twice, nearly breaking an ankle on loose rock, but she kept working, driven by something deeper than physical strength. Call it stubbornness, call it desperation, call it the first real hope she'd felt in years. As sunset approached, they'd built a rough dam across Hammond's diversion channel. It wasn't beautiful, and it probably wouldn't last, but it was there. Ronan stepped back, surveying their work. It needs more reinforcement, but if we pack the gaps with smaller stones and mud, it might hold. They worked into dusk, then into darkness, using feel more than sight. Finally, exhausted and filthy, they stepped back. Now we wait, Ronan said. See if it holds through the night. They made camp nearby, this time risking a small fire because they were far enough from traveled routes. As they ate, Mira realized she was smiling. What? Ronan asked. I've never done anything like this before. Built something that matters, something that fights back. She looked at her battered hands. In Black Ash Ridge, I made pretty stitches in fabric. This feels real. It is real. And if it works, you'll have saved the ranch. We'll have saved it, Mira corrected. Partners, remember? Ronan nodded, and in the firelight his expression softened into something almost tender. Yeah, partners. That night, Mira dreamed of water flowing downhill, relentless and unstoppable, carving new paths through ancient stone. They woke to the sound of water, not the trickle Mira had expected, but a roar, rushing, urgent, alive. She scrambled out of her bedroll and ran to the creek bed, Ronan close behind. In the pale morning light, Water thundered down the natural channel, foaming white over rocks, carving its way south toward the valley, toward the ranch. Their dam had held. It worked, Mira breathed, barely believing it. It actually worked. Ronan crouched at the water's edge, letting it run through his fingers, like he needed to confirm it was real. When he looked up at her, his face showed something she'd never seen before, raw, unguarded relief. "We need to get back," he said. "Make sure it reaches the property, that the channels can handle it, and we need to move fast. Once Hammond figures out what we did—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They broke camp in minutes, riding hard down the mountain. The terrain that had taken them a day and a half to climb, they descended in 6 brutal hours, pushing the horses to their limits. Mira's thighs screamed from gripping the saddle. Her spine jarred with every rough patch, but she didn't ask to slow down. By early afternoon, they could see the valley spread below them, brown and thirsty under the relentless sun, and threading through it like a vein of silver water. The creek was running again, cutting its path across Ronan's land, filling channels that had been dry for months. When they reached the ranch, the change was already visible. The main water trough was filling, overflow spilling onto ground so parched it drank the moisture instantly. The 3 cows stood nearby, confused by the sudden abundance. The windmill, still half broken, creaked in the breeze like it was celebrating. Ronan dismounted and just stood there, staring at running water like it was a miracle he'd stopped believing in. "How long do you think we have?" Mira asked quietly. "Before Hammond notices? Maybe a day if we're lucky? Maybe hours if we're not." He turned to her, his expression hardening into something determined and dangerous. "We need to fortify. If Hammond comes with those hired guns, we need to be ready to hold this place." "You think he'll actually attack?" "I think we just cost him a lot of money and made him look like a fool. Men like Hammond don't forgive that." They spent what remained of the afternoon preparing for siege. Ronan checked his weapons, 2 rifles, a shotgun, his revolver, and made sure they were loaded and positioned around the house. He nailed shutters across windows, reinforced the doors, stockpiled ammunition. Mira filled every container they owned with water, knowing that if it came to a standoff, they needed to outlast whatever Hammond threw at them. As dusk settled, they stood on the porch and watched the western horizon. The air felt heavy, electric with approaching violence. "I should ride to Dalton Creek," Ronan said. "Try to get word to the territorial marshal, make an official complaint. You think Hammond will give you that much time?" "No, but I have to try something. We can't just wait here like—" Dust rose in the distance, riders coming fast from the north. "Too late," Mira whispered. Ronan's hand moved to his gun belt. "Get inside, bar the door behind me." "Absolutely not. We're partners, remember?" She grabbed the shotgun from where it leaned against the porch rail. "You taught me how to shoot this thing. Time to see if I learned." "Mira, don't." Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "Don't you dare try to protect me by shutting me out. If this place falls, we fall together." Ronan looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, maybe the beginning of something deeper. Neither was ready to name. "Stay behind cover," he said finally. "Don't shoot unless I do. And aim for center mass, not the head. Easier target." 7 riders emerged from the dust. Hammond led them, no longer wearing a suit, but rough trail clothes, his face twisted with rage. The men flanking him were the same hired guns from before, plus 4 more, all armed, all looking like they'd done this kind of work before. They stopped 50 feet from the house, spreading out in a loose line. Hammond's horse pranced nervously, sensing the tension. "You've got some nerve, Vale," Hammond called out. His voice was tight, controlled fury, barely leashed. "I gave you every chance to do this the civilized way, but you chose theft instead." "Theft?" Ronan's voice carried clear and cold. "That water was mine to begin with. You're the one who stole it, Hammond. You and your syndicate friends redirecting a creek that's run through this valley for 1,000 years. All I did was put things back the way they should be. That's not how the law sees it." "The law?" Ronan laughed, bitter and sharp. You bought the law, Hammond. The sheriff, the judge, probably half the territorial legislature. But that doesn't make you right. It just makes you rich. Hammond's face went purple. Last chance, Vale. Ride out now. Take your fat wife and whatever you can carry and leave. I'll even pay you half what I originally offered. But if you're still here when the sun comes up tomorrow, what happens next is on your head. The words hit Mira like a physical blow. Fat wife. The casual cruelty of it, the way he'd used her body as a weapon, as proof that she didn't matter. All the old wounds tore open. Every whisper, every laugh, every moment in Black Ash Ridge when someone had looked at her and found her lacking. But this time, something was different. This time she was holding a shotgun. This time she stood next to a man who'd chosen her not in spite of what she was, but because of it. My wife, Ronan said, his voice dropping into something deadly quiet, has more courage in her little finger than you've got in your entire corrupt organization. She rode into the mountains with me. She hauled rocks and built that dam with her own hands. She earned this water, Hammond. She earned this land. And I'll be damned if I let you or anyone else take it from her. The words settled over Mira like a warm blanket, filling spaces inside her she hadn't known were empty. Ronan had called her his wife not as an afterthought, not as a technicality, but as something he was proud of, something worth defending. Hammond's hand moved toward his gun. Don't, Ronan said, raising his rifle. I'm a better shot than you'll ever be, and at this range I won't miss. Neither will my wife. So unless you want to find out how many of your hired guns are willing to die for your water rights, I suggest you turn around. For a long moment, the only sound was wind moving through dead grass and horses shifting nervously. Mira's finger rested on the shotgun trigger, her heart hammering so hard she thought Hammond might hear it. Finally, Hammond yanked his horse's reins, spinning it around. You've made an enemy you can't afford, Vale. I'll bury you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I will bury you. He rode off, his hired guns following. They didn't look back. Mira lowered the shotgun, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Ronan took it from her gently, setting it aside, then pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, adrenaline draining out all at once, leaving her weak and trembling. You did good, he murmured into her hair. You stood your ground. I'm proud of you. Mira wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she just held on to him, breathing in the smell of dust and sweat and survival, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. They'd won this round, but Hammond's parting words hung in the air like a curse, and Mira knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The water kept flowing through the night. Mira couldn't sleep, too wired from the confrontation. So she walked down to the creek and sat on its bank, listening to it run. The sound was hypnotic, soothing, proof that impossible things could happen if you fought hard enough. Ronan found her there around midnight, carrying a blanket. He draped it over her shoulders and sat beside her without speaking. They stayed like that for a while, two people watching water flow in darkness, both understanding that this moment of peace was temporary. Hammond won't let this go, Mira said finally. I know. He'll find another way to destroy us, legal ways probably, ways we can't fight with guns and dams. I know that too. Ronan picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. But we bought ourselves time, maybe enough time to figure out our next move. What is our next move? Honestly, I don't know yet, but we'll think of something. He glanced at her. You could leave, you know. This isn't your fight. You didn't sign up for armed standoffs and corrupt syndicates. I'd understand if... Stop. Mira turned to face him. I'm not leaving. This is exactly my fight. You think I came out here looking for an easy life? I came because I was tired of being invisible, tired of being the punchline. Out here, I matter. What I do matters. And I'm not giving that up just because some rich bastard thinks he owns the world. Ronan smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. She pulled the blanket tighter. When you chose me off that platform, I thought you were desperate or crazy or both. But you knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you? You saw something in me I didn't see in myself. I saw someone who'd survived things that would have broken most people. I saw someone who didn't need fixing." He paused. "I saw someone I could trust." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Mira felt something shift in her chest. Some wall she'd built years ago starting to crack. "Ronan, She stopped, not sure what she was trying to say. He stood, offering his hand. "Come on, we should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated." She took his hand and let him pull her up. They walked back to the house together, and when they reached the porch, Ronan hesitated. "Mira, thank you for staying, for fighting, for being exactly who you are." She wanted to kiss him. The realization shocked her, not just the desire itself, but the fact that for the first time in her life, she felt like someone might actually want to kiss her back. But fear held her frozen, old insecurities whispering that she was reading this wrong, that she'd only embarrass herself. Instead, she said, "Get some sleep, Ronan. We'll need our strength." She went inside, closing the door between them, and spent half the night wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Morning brought trouble in a form they hadn't expected. Ronan was checking the livestock when a wagon rattled up the road, driven by a man Mira didn't recognize. He climbed down slowly, his movements careful, and pulled an envelope from his coat. "Ronan Vale?" "That's me. I'm Albert Grimes, clerk for the Territorial Land Office. I have a legal notice for you." Ronan took the envelope, his face going hard. He tore it open and read, his jaw tightening with every line. When he finished, he looked up at Grimes with barely controlled fury. "This is garbage." "That's not for me to decide, sir. I'm just delivering the paperwork." "What is it?" Mira asked, walking over. Ronan handed her the notice. The legal language was dense and confusing, but the core message was clear. Hammond's syndicate had filed a claim disputing Ronan's water rights, citing historical precedent and territorial statutes. There would be a hearing in 6 weeks. Until then, all parties were ordered to maintain current water usage and refrain from altering existing channels or diversions. "They're trying to make our dam illegal," Mira said, understanding flooding through her. "If we have to maintain existing channels, that means keeping Hammond's diversion in place." "That's one interpretation," Grimes said carefully, "but again, that's for the hearing to decide." "Who's judging this hearing?" Ronan asked. "Judge Wickham out of Dalton Creek, Hammond's man." Grimes didn't deny it. He climbed back onto his wagon. "Hearing set for July 14th. You'll want to bring any documentation supporting your claim, original land grant, water surveys, witness testimony." "Good luck, Mr. Vale." He drove off, leaving Ronan standing there with the notice crumpled in his fist. "They outplayed us," he said quietly. "We restored the water, but now they've made it illegal to keep it. By the time this gets through their rigged hearing, the drought will have finished us anyway." Mira's mind raced. "What if we don't wait for the hearing?" "What do you mean?" "What if we build our case now, get evidence, witness statements, documentation proving that Creek's been running through this property for longer than Hammond's syndicate has existed? Make it so obvious, so undeniable, that even a corrupt judge can't ignore it. And how do we do that? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way." She looked at the notice again, studying the legal language. "This says we need to prove historical water rights dating to original land settlement. When did you file your land claim?" 4 years ago, but the valley's been used by ranchers for decades before that. Old Man Thorpe had a homestead here in the 50s, used the same creek for his livestock. Where's Thorpe now? Dead 5 years ago. Does he have family? Anyone who'd remember the original water access? Ronan thought for a moment. His daughter married a rancher over in the Eastern Valley. Haven't seen her in years, but she might still be around. Then we find her. We find anyone and everyone who remembers that creek running through this valley. We build a case so strong Hammond can't buy his way around it. Mira, that could take weeks, and we still need to work the ranch, maintain the water supply, keep this place running. So we split up. You handle the ranch, I'll ride out and gather evidence. Ronan stared at her. Alone? Through country you barely know, talking to people you've never met, building a legal case you have no training for? You have a better idea. He didn't, and they both knew it. That afternoon, Mira saddled the mare and packed supplies for a week-long journey. Ronan gave her directions to the Eastern Valley, to the general area where Thorpe's daughter had settled, along with names of other old-timers who might remember the water situation from before Hammond's interference. If anyone gives you trouble, ride away, he said, checking her saddle straps one more time. Don't be brave, don't try to fight, just get out. I'll be careful, and if you can't find what we need, come back. Don't push too hard, trying to save something that might already be lost. Mira looked at him, at this hard man who'd somehow become the most important person in her life, and felt that crack in her walls widen a little more. I'm not coming back empty-handed, she said. I'm going to prove Hammond's a fraud, and then we're going to make sure everyone knows it. She rode east as the sun climbed higher, leaving Ronan standing alone in front of the house they'd fought so hard to keep. In her saddlebag, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, she carried the legal notice that could destroy everything, but she also carried something else. Determination so fierce it burned like fever. Black Ash Ridge had spent years telling her she didn't matter. Hammond thought he could steal from her without consequences. The whole damn territory seemed to believe that people like her and Ronan, people without money or connections or perfectly acceptable appearances, could be stepped on without pushback. It was time to prove them all wrong. The Eastern Valley was harder to reach than Ronan's directions suggested. Mira got turned around twice, had to backtrack through a canyon that nearly trapped her, and spent one terrifying night camped in scrub brush while coyotes yowled in the darkness. But on the third day, she found the cluster of ranches Ronan had described. Thorpe's daughter, it turned out, was named Catherine Miller now, a severe woman in her 50s who ran her dead husband's ranch with iron efficiency. She looked Mira up and down with open skepticism when she explained her business. Your Ronan Vale's new wife? The one from Black Ash Ridge? Yes, ma'am. Catherine's expression shifted slightly. Not quite friendliness, but something less hostile. I heard about you. Heard the whole town lost their minds when Vale chose you instead of the pretty ones. Mira's face burned. Yes, ma'am, that's fairly accurate. Good for him. Pretty ones aren't worth much when the work gets hard. Catherine gestured to her porch. Sit, tell me what you need. Me. Mira explained the water situation, Hammond's diversion, the legal notice. Catherine listened without interrupting, her weathered face unreadable. My father worked that valley for 20 years, she said when Mira finished. Used that creek to water his cattle, his horses, his garden. It ran year-round back then, never failed even in drought. When he died and I moved east, I figured whoever took over the land would keep using it the same way. Her jaw tightened. Didn't know someone would try to steal it outright. Would you testify to that in court? Against Hammond and his syndicate? Catherine laughed, harsh and bitter. Girl, I'm one woman running a ranch that's barely profitable. Hammond could crush me with a legal bill just for showing up to court. I can't afford to make that kind of enemy. Mira's heart sank. I understand. But, Catherine continued, I can give you something better than testimony. I can give you documentation. She disappeared into the house and returned with a wooden box, old and battered. Inside were papers, deeds, surveys, water rights documents dating back to the 1850s. Catherine spread them on the porch floor. My father kept records of everything. Here, this is the original territorial survey from 1857. Shows the creek running through what's now your land. And this, she pulled out another document, is the water rights agreement signed when the territorial government first opened this region for settlement. Guarantees natural waterways remain accessible to all landowners along their path. Mira stared at the papers like they were treasure. You'd let me take these? Copies. I'll keep the originals, but you can take these to a land office and have them certified. should be enough to show that Creek's been flowing the same path for 70 years, which predates Hammond's claim by about 69 years. Why help us? You said you can't afford to make Hammond an enemy. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Because I'm tired of men like Hammond taking what doesn't belong to them. Because my father broke his back building something honest, and I won't let some Eastern syndicate piss on his memory. And because, she looked at Mira directly, because if you're brave enough to take this on, someone should have your back. Mira left the Miller Ranch with documents, names of 3 other old-timers who might provide supporting testimony, and something she hadn't had in a long time, allies. Catherine might not testify in person, but she'd given Mira ammunition. Over the next week, Mira tracked down the other names on her list. Not all of them were willing to help. Some were too scared of Hammond, others too old or sick to get involved, but 2 more agreed to provide written statements about the Creek's historical path. An old surveyor named Dutch Peterson even offered to testify in person, claiming he was too old to give a damn about consequences anymore. By the time Mira turned her horse back toward home, exhaustion had seeped into her bones, but her saddlebag was full of certified documents, notarized statements, and evidence that might actually stand up in court. She rode into the ranch at dusk, 11 days after leaving. Ronan was working on the windmill, finally getting the mechanism to turn properly. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and the relief that crossed his face made Mira's chest tighten. He climbed down and was at her side before she could dismount, helping her off the horse, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. "You're all right," he said, and it wasn't a question, but a statement of pure relief. "I was starting to think—" He stopped himself. Starting to think what? That I'd sent you out there and something happened. That I'd lost you before I even... He trailed off, seeming to realize what he was saying. Mira touched his face, her palm against his rough cheek. "I'm fine, and I found something." She showed him everything, the documents, the statements, the surveyor willing to testify. As Ronan read through each piece, his expression shifted from hope to something stronger, something that looked like belief. "This might actually work," he said quietly. "Mira, this might actually save us. Don't celebrate yet. We still have to face Hammond's lawyers and a biased judge. But at least now we're fighting with more than just stubbornness." That night they sat on the porch, going through the documents again, building their strategy. The work was tedious and complex, full of legal terminology neither fully understood, but they pushed through it together, 2 people who'd started as strangers and somehow become something more. Around midnight, Mira's head drooped onto Ronan's shoulder. She jerked awake, embarrassed. "Sorry, Don't apologize." His arm came around her, warm and solid. "You rode for 11 days straight, gathering evidence to save our ranch. You've earned some rest." "Our ranch," Mira repeated softly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. You've worked as hard as me to keep this place alive. Maybe harder. It stopped being just mine the day you agreed to come here." Mira closed her eyes, letting herself lean into him. "I never thought I'd have this. A home, a partner, something worth fighting for." "Neither did I," Ronan admitted. "I came out here thinking land and work were enough, that if I could just build something solid, I'd be satisfied. But you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You made me realize that building something with someone is better than building something alone." She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight his face was open in a way she'd never seen. Vulnerable. Real. "Ronan, He kissed her. It wasn't smooth or practiced. Their noses bumped, the angle was wrong, and Mira had no idea what to do with her hands. But it was real and warm and wanted, and when they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mira felt something inside her click into place. "I should have asked first," Ronan said, sounding uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "You should definitely do it again." So he did. The weeks before their hearing passed, in a blur of preparation and paranoia, Ronan and Mira worked 18-hour days, maintaining the ranch, organizing their evidence, anticipating every argument Hammond's lawyers might throw at them. The creek kept flowing, but they both knew it was borrowed time. Hammond didn't come back in person, but his presence hung over the valley like smoke. Twice they found fence lines cut in the night. Once, someone drove cattle across their newly planted grain field, destroying weeks of work. Small harassments, nothing they could prove, just enough to remind them they were being watched. "He's trying to provoke us," Ronan said one morning, surveying the trampled field. "Wants us to do something stupid so he can claim we're the aggressors." "So we don't take the bait," Mira said, though her hands clenched into fists. "We stay calm, we wait for the hearing." But staying calm was harder than it sounded. The stress wore on both of them in different ways. Ronan grew quieter, more withdrawn, spending long hours checking the property line like he could guard it through sheer vigilance. Mira threw herself into memorizing their legal case, reading the documents until her eyes burned, terrified she'd miss some crucial detail that would unravel everything. Their relationship had shifted after that kiss, but neither knew quite what to do about it. They were more careful with each other now, hyper-aware of every touch, every glance. Ronan would reach for her hand while reviewing documents, then seem surprised he'd done it. Mira would catch herself watching him work, memorizing the way he moved, then feel embarrassed when he noticed. One night, 3 weeks before the hearing, Mira found Ronan sitting alone by the creek, staring at the water like it held answers. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling beside him. "Keep thinking about what happens if we lose. Hammond gets the water rights. The ranch dies. We lose everything we've built. Then we start over somewhere else." Just like that, his voice was rough with frustration. "After everything we've done, everything you've sacrificed, we just walk away. If we have to, yes." Mira took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Ronan, I didn't come here for the land. I came because someone finally saw me as something other than a mistake. That doesn't change no matter what Hammond does." He pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. "I never thanked you properly. For the evidence you gathered, for everything. You've thanked me plenty. Not for the important things." He turned to face her, his expression intense in the darkness. "Back in Black Ash Ridge, when I chose you, it was practical, strategic. I needed someone strong and smart, and you were both. But somewhere along the way," he stopped, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easy. "It stopped being practical. You stopped being my partner and started being your what?" "Everything," he said simply. "You're everything, Mira." She kissed him, and this time there was no hesitation, no awkwardness, just need and trust and the terrifying vulnerability of letting someone see you completely. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens at that hearing," he said quietly, "we face it together. Win or lose, we're still us." "Win or lose," Mira agreed. "Win or..." The night before the hearing, Esther appeared at the ranch, riding a horse she'd clearly borrowed, her face flushed with urgency. "I had to warn you," she said, barely waiting to dismount. "There's talk in Black Ash Ridge. Hammond's been spreading rumors about Ronan, saying he's unstable, dangerous. He's telling people Ronan threatened him at gunpoint, that you two are squatters trying to steal water that belongs to the syndicate." "That's a lie," Mira said. "I know that, you know that, but Hammond's convincing, and he's got money backing up his words. He's been buying drinks at the saloon, making donations to the church, playing the generous benefactor, while painting you two as desperate criminals." Esther grabbed Mira's hands. "I'm scared for you. Judge Wickham's already biased, and now Hammond's poisoning public opinion too. Even if you have evidence, even if you're legally right, he might find a way to make it not matter." Ronan emerged from the barn, drawn by voices. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that Mrs. Pritchard organized a petition supporting Hammond's claim. Got 200 signatures in 3 days." Esther's voice shook. "They're calling Mira a gold digger who tricked you into marriage. They're saying she's the reason your ranch is failing, that the drought's worse because..." She stopped herself. Because what? Mira's voice came out flat, already knowing the answer. Because you're cursed, or the land is. They're finding any excuse to blame you, Mira. I'm sorry. Old wounds tore open. 8 years of whispers and cruelty came rushing back. Every laugh, every sideways glance, every moment she'd been made to feel like her existence was a burden on the world. Mira felt something crack inside her chest. Let them think what they want, Ronan said, his voice hard as iron. We're not fighting for their approval. We're fighting for our rights. But Mira barely heard him. She walked away from both of them, heading toward the house, needing space to breathe. Inside, she collapsed onto the bed she'd been sleeping in alone, despite everything that had shifted between her and Ronan, and finally let herself cry. Not quiet tears, ugly, gasping sobs that tore through her like storms. Years of holding it together, of pretending the cruelty didn't hurt, came pouring out. She'd been so stupid to think things had changed. She'd started believing she deserved respect, deserved love, deserved to take up space in the world. But Black Ash Ridge was right there to remind her, you're still the fat girl no one wanted. You're still a joke. You're still cursed. Ronan found her 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything, just climbed onto the bed and pulled her against his chest, holding her while she shook apart. His shirt grew wet with her tears, but he didn't let go. I'm tired, Mira finally managed to say. I'm so tired of fighting to prove I'm worth something. You don't have to prove anything, not to them, not to anyone. Yes, I do. That's the problem. She pulled back, looking at him with swollen eyes. If we lose tomorrow, everyone will say it's because of me, that you made a mistake choosing the wrong woman, that I ruined your life. They can say whatever they want. They'd be wrong. Ronan cupped her face in his rough hands. Listen to me, Mira. You didn't ruin my life. You saved it. Before you came here, I was just existing, working, surviving, building something I couldn't even enjoy because I was doing it alone. You made it mean something. You made me remember why I wanted this life in the first place. But what if? No what ifs. Tomorrow we walk into that courtroom and we present our case. We show that corrupt judge and Hammond's expensive lawyers that we have truth on our side. And if we lose anyway, if they steal our water and our land, then we start over. But we start over together, and that makes us stronger than Hammond could ever be. He kissed her forehead. You're not cursed, Mira. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. She wanted to believe him. She tried to believe him. But the voices from Black Ash Ridge were so much louder than his certainty, and she was so damn tired of fighting them. They barely slept that night. At dawn they dressed carefully. Ronan in his only suit, worn but clean. Mira in a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric. Ronan had bought her 2 weeks prior. She'd made it simple but dignified, refusing to look poor, even if they were. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair, and Ronan had to help her with the buttons down her back. Ready? He asked. No, but let's go anyway. They rode to Dalton Creek in heavy silence, both carrying the weight of everything that could go wrong. The town was bigger than Black Ash Ridge, rougher around the edges, full of miners and railroad workers, and people passing through on their way to somewhere else. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building that looked too fancy for its surroundings, like someone had dropped a piece of civilization into the middle of chaos. Hammond was already there, flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked relaxed, confident, like this was just another business transaction he knew he'd win. When he saw Mira and Ronan, his smile was pure poison. Mr. and Mrs. Vale, how nice of you to show up. Saved us the trouble of a default judgment. Ronan ignored him, guiding Mira into the courthouse. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, with wooden benches and a judge's bench that had seen better days. A handful of spectators sat scattered in the gallery, mostly Hammond's people, she suspected, here to watch the show. Dutch Peterson was there too, the old surveyor, who'd agreed to testify. He nodded at Mira, his weathered face grim but determined. Seeing him steadied her slightly. At least they weren't completely alone. Judge Wickham entered right at 9 o'clock. He was younger than Mira expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and calculating eyes. He looked like someone who'd learned early that justice and law weren't always the same thing. "This is a hearing regarding water rights for the Northwest Valley Territory," Wickham said, his voice carrying the bored efficiency of someone who'd already decided the outcome. "The Territorial Water Syndicate claims historical rights to redirect creek flow based on economic development priorities. Mr. Vale disputes this claim, arguing natural waterway precedent. We'll hear testimony from both parties, review submitted evidence, and I'll render a decision by end of day." He looked at Hammond's lead lawyer. "Councillor Davis, you may begin." Davis stood, and Mira immediately hated him. He had that particular smugness that came from winning too often, from knowing the system was rigged in his favor. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. The Territorial Water Syndicate has invested significant capital in developing this region. We've built infrastructure, created jobs, brought prosperity to communities that were barely surviving. As part of this development, we've implemented water management systems that maximize efficiency and benefit the greatest number of people." He gestured to a stack of documents. "The creek in question runs through multiple properties, Mr. Val's Ranch is one small piece of a much larger puzzle. The syndicate's diversion ensures water reaches areas of highest economic value rather than being wasted on a struggling operation." "Wasted," Ronan muttered beside Mira, his jaw tight. Davis continued, laying out his case with practiced ease. He presented surveys showing the syndicate's extensive land holdings, financial projections about economic impact, testimony from other ranchers who'd sold to Hammond, and now benefited from the syndicate's water management. It was all very polished, very professional, very convincing if you didn't look too closely at what was actually being said. When Davis finally sat down, looking satisfied, Judge Wickham turned to Ronan. "Mr. Vale, you're representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." Ronan stood, and Mira could see the tension in his shoulders. "Can't afford lawyers who charge more than my land's worth." "Proceed with your testimony." Ronan took a breath and began. He explained how he'd homesteaded the land 4 years ago, how the creek had run through his property continuously until 3 months ago, how he'd discovered Hammond's illegal diversion. His words were clear but unpolished, lacking the legal sophistication of Davis's presentation. "Your Honor, that creek's been flowing the same path for longer than any of us have been alive. It's a natural waterway, not something the syndicate can just redirect because they feel like it. I've got historical documents proving—" "Mr. Vale," Wickham interrupted, "the court recognizes the creek's natural origin. However, water law in the territory prioritizes beneficial use. Can you demonstrate that your use of the water provides greater public benefit than the syndicate's management?" "Public benefit? Your Honor, I'm trying to keep my ranch alive, feed my livestock, support my wife. How's that less beneficial than funneling water to land Hammond bought up cheap by forcing out the original owners?" "Please refrain from accusations without evidence. Do you have documentation supporting your water rights claim?" This was it. Mira stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "Your Honor, may I present evidence on my husband's behalf?" Wickham looked surprised that she'd spoken, then vaguely annoyed. "You're not a licensed attorney, Mrs. Vale." "No, sir, but I gathered the evidence and I can explain what it shows." Wickham glanced at Hammond, who gave a small shrug like he was amused by the whole thing. "Very well. Proceed." Mira approached the bench with the documents she'd spent weeks collecting. Her hands trembled, but she didn't drop anything. She laid out the territorial survey from 1857, the water rights agreement, Catherine Miller's father's homestead records showing creek usage dating back decades. This survey clearly shows the creek flowing through what's now our property 69 years before Hammond Syndicate even existed. And this document, she held up the water rights agreement, establishes that natural waterways remain accessible to all landowners along their path. The syndicate didn't create that creek. They don't have the right to redirect it away from established properties just because it's more profitable for them. Davis stood immediately. Your Honor, historical surveys don't supersede current territorial water management policy. The syndicate filed proper permits for their diversion with the Territorial Land Office. The Land Office, controlled by men Hammond paid off, Ronan cut in. Mr. Vale, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt, Wickham snapped. He turned to Mira. Do you have anything beyond historical documents? Witness testimony, perhaps? Yes, Your Honor. Dutch Peterson, who surveyed this territory for 30 years, is here to testify about the creek's original path and the legal precedent for natural waterway protection. Dutch was sworn in, and his testimony was solid. He explained in technical detail how the creek had flowed, why Hammond's diversion violated established territorial guidelines, how the syndicate had manipulated permit applications to make their theft look legal. He was calm, credible, and clearly knew his business. But Mira could see Wickham's face, could read the calculation happening behind his eyes. Dutch's testimony was damaging to Hammond's case, maybe even conclusive, which meant Wickham was looking for any excuse to dismiss it. When Dutch finished, Davis stood for cross-examination. Mr. Peterson, isn't it true you were terminated from the Territorial Survey Office 3 years ago for insubordination? I was fired for refusing to falsify survey reports at your client's request. Dutch shot back. So you admit you have a personal grudge against the syndicate? I admit I don't like thieves. Your Honor, Davis said smoothly, this witness clearly lacks objectivity. His testimony is tainted by personal bias. Wickham nodded. The court will take that into consideration. Mira's stomach dropped. They were going to dismiss Dutch's testimony, bury it under accusations of bias, and she could see it happening, but couldn't stop it. The hearing dragged on for another 3 hours. Davis called witnesses who testified that the syndicate's water management had improved crop yields, increased property values, brought prosperity to the region. All of it was technically true, but completely missed the point that this prosperity was built on stolen resources. When Wickham finally called a recess to review the evidence, Mira and Ronan stepped outside into afternoon heat that felt suffocating. We're losing, Mira said quietly. We haven't lost yet. Ronan, look at his face in there. Wickham's already decided. He's just going through the motions, so it looks legitimate. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make the world stop being so casually cruel. We have proof. We have documentation. We have everything we need to win, and it doesn't matter because the system's rigged. Ronan pulled her into an alley beside the courthouse, away from curious eyes. Listen to me. Yes, Wickham's corrupt. Yes, Hammond bought this hearing before it started. But we came here and we fought anyway. We stood up in that courtroom and we made them work for it. That matters, Mira. Maybe not legally. Maybe not in ways that save the ranch. But it matters. How? How does it matter if we lose everything? Because you're not the scared woman I met in Black Ash Ridge anymore. Because you rode into the mountains and built a dam with your own hands. Because you gathered evidence and faced down a corrupt system, even though you knew it was rigged against you. Because you proved to yourself that you're strong enough to fight for what's yours. He gripped her shoulders. Hammond can take our land. He can steal our water, but he can't take what you've become. That's yours forever. Mira wanted to believe him, but all she could think about was Black Ash Ridge laughing, saying they were right all along. Saying she'd dragged Ronan down with her weight, and her bad luck and her curse. They filed back into the courtroom for Wickham's decision. The judge looked tired now, like he was ready for the charade to be over. He shuffled through papers, cleared his throat, and Mira knew what was coming before he opened his mouth. After reviewing all testimony and evidence presented, this court finds in favor of the Territorial Water Syndicate. While Mr. and Mrs. Vale have demonstrated historical usage of the creek in question, current territorial water management policy prioritizes beneficial use and economic development. The syndicate's diversion serves a greater number of stakeholders and provides measurable economic benefit to the region. Therefore, the existing diversion will remain in place, and Mr. Vale is hereby ordered to cease any interference with syndicate water management operations. Failure to comply will result in legal penalties and possible criminal charges. Wickham banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. The sound of that gavel falling felt like a death sentence. Hammond stood, shaking hands with his lawyers, looking pleased. He caught Mira's eye across the courtroom and smiled, a smile that said, "I told you I'd bury you." Mira couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in, voices buzzing in her ears like insects. She pushed past Ronan, past the benches, out into the street where the late afternoon sun felt like accusation. She walked without direction, barely seeing where she was going. Behind her, she heard Ronan calling her name, but she couldn't stop, couldn't face him, couldn't stand to see the defeat in his eyes and know she'd caused it. She ended up at the edge of town, near the railroad tracks, where freight cars sat rusting on sidings. She collapsed against a water tower, her back to the peeling wood, and finally let the truth wash over her. They'd lost. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built together was gone. Hammond would tear down their dam, redirect the creek permanently, and the ranch would die. They'd have to sell for pennies on the dollar or just walk away from it entirely. And Black Ash Ridge would get exactly what it expected. Proof that Mira Holloway was a mistake, a curse, someone who destroyed everything she touched. Ronan found her 20 minutes later. He sat down beside her without speaking, just his presence steady and solid in the wreckage of their hopes. "I'm sorry," Mira finally said. "This is my fault. If you'd married someone else, someone Hammond respected, someone the judge would have taken seriously." "Stop." Ronan's voice was firm but not angry. "This isn't your fault. Hammond would have stolen the water no matter who I married. Wickham would have ruled against us even if I'd shown up with the governor's endorsement. The system was rigged from the start, but at least with someone else, you wouldn't have the whole territory laughing at you. You wouldn't be married to the woman everyone thinks cursed your land. I'm married to the woman who saved my life. That's all that matters to me." Mira shook her head, tears running hot down her face. "How can you say that? We lost, Ronan. Hammond won. The ranch is finished." "Maybe, but we're not finished. Not unless we decide to be." He took her hand, holding it tight. "Remember what I said on the porch that night. Win or lose, we're still us. That hasn't changed. Hammond can have his victory. I've got something better. I've got you." The words settled over her, warm despite everything. Mira wanted to believe in them, wanted to believe that love and partnership were enough when the whole world was against you. But belief felt like a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. They sat together as the sun set, two people holding on to each other in the ruins of a dream they'd fought so hard to build. Tomorrow they'd have to face the reality of what they'd lost. Tomorrow they'd have to figure out what came next. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And maybe that would have to be enough. They rode back to the ranch in darkness, neither speaking, both trapped in their own versions of what came next. The defeat sat heavy between them, not just the legal loss, but the weight of knowing they'd done everything right and still failed, because the game was rigged from the start. When they finally reached home, the creek was still flowing. Their dam still held in the mountains. Hammond hadn't moved to tear it down yet, probably savoring his courtroom victory before delivering the final blow. The water ran through channels Ronan had dug, past the house they'd fought to keep, under moonlight that made everything look peaceful despite the chaos underneath. Mira stood by the creek while Ronan tended the horses, listening to water that would soon be stolen again. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of hope. All her life she'd been told she didn't matter, that she was too much and not enough all at once. For a few months here, she'd started believing something different. She'd started believing she could fight back, could build something, could prove everyone wrong. But Black Ash Ridge had been right all along. She was cursed. Everything she touched turned to ash. "We should sleep," Ronan said, coming up behind her. "Figure out our options in the morning when we're not exhausted." "What options?" Hammond won. "The judge ordered us to leave the water alone. If we fight back, they'll arrest us. Then we don't fight, we adapt." But his voice held no conviction, just bone-deep weariness. They went inside, and for the first time since that kiss on the porch, Ronan followed Mira to her room. Not for romance or comfort, just because neither wanted to be alone with their thoughts. They lay on top of the blankets, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. "I keep thinking about my father," Ronan said quietly. "How he worked himself to death for nothing. How he believed if he just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, things would turn out fair. I swore I'd be smarter than him, tougher, but here I am losing everything just like he did." "You're nothing like him," Mira said. "You fought. You stood up to Hammond when everyone else just rolled over. That matters." "Does it? We still lost. Maybe losing with dignity is better than winning by being a bastard like Hammond." Ronan turned his head to look at her. "You really believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." Mira's voice cracked. "I thought if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, I could make people see me differently. But it doesn't matter what I do. I'm always going to be the fat girl from Black Ash Ridge who ruined Ronan Vale's life." "You didn't ruin anything. You made everything better." "Then why does it feel like I'm drowning?" Ronan pulled her close, and Mira buried her face in his chest, trying not to fall completely apart. She'd cried enough today. She was tired of crying, but the tears came anyway, silent and hot, soaking into his shirt, while he held her and pretended not to notice. Somewhere around midnight, exhaustion finally dragged them both under. Mira dreamed of water being stolen, of courts laughing at her, of standing on that platform in Black Ash Ridge while everyone pointed and whispered. She woke before dawn, disoriented and aching, to find Ronan already gone. She found him outside, standing by the creek in the pre-dawn grey. He'd been there a while, judging by the stillness in his posture. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Kept thinking about the hearing, about Wickham's ruling." He turned to face her. He said we had to stop interfering with the syndicate's water management, but he didn't order us to tear down the dam. "What?" "The judge's order said we can't interfere with their operations, but our dam isn't interfering. It's restoring natural flow. Technically, we're not violating anything unless Hammond proves we tampered with his diversion after the ruling." Mira's exhausted brain struggled to follow. "You're saying we just leave things as they are? Keep the water flowing and wait for Hammond to do something about it?" "I'm saying the legal system gave us a gap. Maybe a small one, maybe one that won't last. But until Hammond files another complaint and gets another court order specifically demanding we tear down our work, we're not breaking any laws." "That's a technicality, Ronan. Hammond will see right through it." "Let him. At least we buy ourselves time. Maybe enough time for something to change." "Like what?" "I don't know yet." But there was something in his eyes now, a spark of the stubbornness that had kept him building ranches in impossible places. "But I'm not giving up, not yet." 3 days passed in tense waiting. They worked the ranch, maintained the creek flow, and braced for Hammond's retaliation. It came on the 4th day, but not in the form they expected. A rider approached mid-morning, not one of Hammond's hired guns, but a young man in a worn suit who introduced himself as Thomas Whitmore, a reporter for the Territorial Gazette out of the capital. "I was at your hearing," he explained, accepting the water Mira offered, "covering a different case, but I stayed to watch yours. What Judge Wickham did in there, it bothered me, so I did some digging." "Into what?" Ronan asked, immediately suspicious. "Into Hammond's syndicate, their business practices, their water acquisitions, the patterns of properties they've bought up." Whitmore pulled a notebook from his jacket. "You're not the first ranchers they've targeted. Over the past 2 years, they've forced out 17 small operations using the same playbook: redirect water, file legal claims, Buy the land cheap when people can't survive the drought. It's systematic. Mira's heart started beating faster. Can you prove it? I'm working on it, but I need witnesses, people willing to go on record about what Hammond did to them. He looked between them. Your case is the first one with this much documentation. If you'd let me write about it, if we could find other victims willing to talk, we might be able to expose what they're doing. Expose it to who? Ronan's voice was skeptical. The territorial government's as corrupt as the judges. Nobody's going to care about a few ranchers losing their land. Maybe not in the territory, but the capital newspapers reach back east where Hammond's investors live. Rich men care about their reputations. If we can prove the syndicate's built on theft and corruption, if we make enough noise, Hammond's financial backing might dry up. Whitmore leaned forward. I can't promise it'll work, but it's a chance. Ronan looked at Mira. She could see him calculating risks, weighing options. They'd already lost the legal battle. Going public might make things worse, might bring even more attention from Hammond's hired guns. But staying silent meant accepting defeat. Do it, Mira said. Write your story. Use our names. Use our evidence. Use everything. I'm tired of letting people like Hammond operate in the shadows. Mira, Ronan started. No, I'm done being quiet. I spent my whole life trying not to make waves, trying not to draw attention, hoping if I was just small enough people would stop noticing me. Look where that got me. Her voice strengthened. If we're going down, let's go down fighting. Let's make enough noise that Hammond can't ignore us. Ronan studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, Mr. Whitmore, you've got your story. What do you need from us? Whitmore spent the next week documenting everything, interviewing Mira and Ronan, photographing the creek and the dam, copying their evidence. He tracked down Catherine Miller, Dutch Peterson, and 3 other ranchers who'd been forced out by Hammond's tactics. Each interview added another piece to the picture he was building. During that week, Hammond made his move. Not through the courts this time, but through the sheriff's office. 2 deputies showed up with an order to inspect the property, looking for violations of Wickham's ruling. Ronan showed them around, polite but firm, while Mira documented everything they did. The deputies found nothing illegal, but their presence was a clear message. We're watching you. The article ran 2 weeks later, spread across 3 pages in the Territorial Gazette under the headline, Water Thieves, How Eastern Investors Are Bleeding the Frontier Dry. Whitmore's writing was precise and damning. He laid out Hammond's pattern of corruption, named names, provided documentation. He featured Mira and Ronan's case prominently, including the photograph of Mira standing by their dam, an image of a woman who looked nothing like the scared seamstress from Black Ash Ridge. The response was immediate and louder than anyone expected. Other newspapers picked up the story. Back east, Hammond's investors started asking uncomfortable questions. The territorial governor, suddenly under scrutiny, ordered an investigation into water rights acquisitions. It wasn't justice yet, but it was pressure, real pressure. Hammond came to the ranch himself 5 days after the article ran. He looked different now, disheveled, angry, no longer the smooth operator who'd faced them down at gunpoint. He came alone, which should have been Mira's first warning that something had broken in him. You've destroyed me, he said without preamble, standing in the yard like an accusation. My investors are pulling funding. The territorial board is investigating my permits. 20 years of work gone because you couldn't accept a fair business loss. Fair? Ronan's hand rested on his gun belt. You stole our water, corrupted the courts, and tried to starve us out. That's not business, Hammond. That's theft. I created prosperity. I brought development to a dying region. What did you create? A failing ranch held together by stubbornness and a wife who... He looked at Mira, his face twisted with contempt. Who everyone knew you only married because you were desperate. The whole territory laughed at you for choosing her. The words should have hurt. A month ago they would have destroyed Mira. But something had changed in her. She'd ridden into mountains and built dams. She'd faced down judges and gathered evidence. She'd looked at Hammond's hired guns without flinching. The opinion of a corrupt land grabber didn't have the power it once did. "Let them laugh," Mira said calmly. "I'd rather be married to a man who fights for what's right than spend one day living with the kind of person you are." "You smug little—" Hammond's hand moved toward his jacket. Ronan's gun was out faster, aimed steady at Hammond's chest. "Don't even think about it. You've lost, Hammond. Your syndicate's falling apart. Your investors are gone, and you're standing on my property threatening my wife. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and leave. You're going to accept that your water theft scheme is finished. And if you ever come near Mira again, I'll put a bullet in you and claim self-defense." For a moment, Mira thought Hammond might actually drawl. His face went purple, his hand trembling with rage. But he wasn't completely stupid. He turned and walked back to his horse, mounting up with jerky, furious movements. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Ronan replied. "You just don't know it yet." Hammond rode off, and Mira realized she was shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline and something that felt almost like triumph. "Did we just win?" she asked. "Maybe, parts of it anyway." Ronan lowered his gun. "Hammond's organization is crumbling, but that doesn't fix our legal situation. Wickham's ruling still stands. The Creek's still technically the syndicate's to control. So what do? We wait. The territorial investigation might overturn some of Hammond's permits, or it might not. Either way, we keep working. We keep the ranch running. We keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight for. But waiting turned out to be harder than fighting. The investigation moved at the pace of bureaucracy, slowly, carefully, generating paperwork instead of justice. Meanwhile, drought continued strangling the territory. Their creek still flowed thanks to the dam, but other ranchers weren't so lucky. Every week brought news of another family giving up, another property abandoned. 2 months after Whitmore's article, Catherine Miller showed up at the ranch with unexpected news. "The Territorial Board issued preliminary findings," she said, handing Ronan a document. "Hammond's water diversion permits were obtained through fraudulent means. They're suspending all syndicate water rights pending a full investigation," Ronan read quickly, his expression shifting from disbelief to something like hope. "This means—" "It means your dam is legal again. The natural waterway is restored. Hammond can't touch your creek without violating territorial water law." Catherine smiled, tired but genuine. "You won, Ronan. It's not clean, it's not pretty, but you won." Mira felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. After months of fighting, of being told they didn't matter, of watching the system side with corruption over truth, something had actually gone right. "We won," she repeated, testing the words. They felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar. "You won," Catherine corrected. "That article only happened because you gathered evidence and refused to shut up. Half the territory's talking about the fat woman who took on Hammond's empire and beat it." The description should have stung. Fat woman. But Catherine said it without malice, without mockery, just as a statement of fact. And Mira realized something profound in that moment. She'd spent her whole life treating her body as something to apologize for, as evidence of personal failure, but her body had carried her up mountains. It had hauled rocks and built dams. It had stood steady while holding a shotgun against armed men. Her body wasn't a weakness, it was just her body, and it had done everything she'd asked of it. "Thank you," Mira said quietly. "For the documents, for helping us. You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did. Women like us, we have to watch out for each other. Nobody else will." Catherine gathered her reins. "Take care of yourselves. And Mira, don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. You're taking up exactly the right amount of space." After she left, Mira and Ronan stood in their yard, holding the document that meant they could keep their home. The sun was setting, painting the valley in gold and orange, and for the first time in months, the future didn't look like a cliff edge. "What do we do now?" Mira asked. "We rebuild, we expand. We turn this place into something that lasts. Ronan pulled her close, and we do it together. The ranch grew over the following years, not dramatically, but steadily. They bought adjacent land that Hammond's collapsed syndicate had been forced to sell. They improved their irrigation system, built proper outbuildings, increased their herd. It was hard work, back-breaking, endless, the kind of labor that never stops needing doing. But it was theirs, built on their own terms, and that made the exhaustion worthwhile. Other things changed too. Word spread about how Mira had fought Hammond and won. Women started showing up at the ranch. Widows, spinsters, women who'd been told they didn't fit or didn't matter, asking for work, asking for advice, asking if there was space for them in this corner of the world where someone like Mira had made a place for herself. Mira hired as many as the ranch could support. She taught them what Ronan had taught her, how to work land, how to read weather, how to fight when the world said, "You should surrender." The ranch became something bigger than just a home. It became proof that survival was possible, that people the world had written off could build something worth keeping. Black Ash Ridge never apologized. Mrs. Pritchard never admitted she'd been wrong. The people who'd laughed at Mira's wedding continued living their small, judgmental lives, finding new targets for their cruelty. But occasionally, someone would leave that town, usually someone young, usually someone who didn't fit the narrow definitions of acceptable, and make their way to the Vale Ranch, looking for the woman who'd proven you could escape. Mira never turned them away. 5 years after the hearing, Thomas Whitmore returned to write a follow-up article. The ranch had grown into one of the region's more successful operations, known for its water management and for employing women other places wouldn't hire. Whitmore interviewed Mira on the porch where she'd first kissed Ronan, asking her what success felt like. "It feels like work," Mira said honestly. "It feels like getting up every day and choosing to keep building even when it's hard. It feels like proving to myself that I was never the problem. The people who told me I was too much, too big, too unlovable, they were wrong. And it took losing everything to figure that out." Do you think you would have found that strength without the fight with Hammond? Mira considered this. Maybe not. I needed to be pushed to the edge to find out what I was made of. I needed someone like Ronan, who saw me as a partner instead of a problem. I needed to stop waiting for permission to take up space and just start taking it. She paused. But I wish it hadn't taken so much pain to get here. I wish I'd known earlier that the voice in my head telling me I was worthless was just an echo of other people's cruelty, that I could have rejected it any time I was brave enough. The article ran under a new headline, "The Woman They Underestimated." It included photographs of the ranch, of the women working there, of Mira and Ronan standing together by the creek that had nearly destroyed them and ultimately saved them. This time, no one laughed. On their 7th anniversary, Ronan surprised Mira by taking her back to Black Ash Ridge. She didn't want to go. That town held nothing but bad memories, but he insisted. "Trust me," was all he'd say. They rode into town on a clear morning, and Mira felt the old anxiety rising in her chest. But something was different. The people who stared at her now stared with curiosity instead of contempt. A few even nodded respectfully. Ronan led her to the town square, to the platform where she'd stood 7 years ago, one woman among 10, believing she was the least wanted of them all. "Remember this?" he asked. "How could I forget? Remember what you thought of yourself that day, what you believed about who you were?" "I believed I was exactly what they said I was, too fat to be loved, too much and not enough, someone who should be grateful for any scrap of attention." The memories hurt less now, but they still stung. "And what do you believe now?" Mira looked at the platform, at the town that had tried to define her, at the life she'd built despite everything they'd said. "I believe I was always worth loving. I just needed to find someone who saw it, and then I needed to see it myself." Ronan pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Esther sent this. She thought you'd want to know." He handed it to her. It was a wedding announcement. Sarah Patterson marrying a banker's son from Dalton Creek. A perfectly respectable match, exactly what everyone had expected for her 7 years ago. Good for her, Mira said, and meant it. There's more. Ronan pointed to a smaller announcement below. Mary Henderson had married to a mine superintendent. 2 of the Morrison twins had moved back east. Of the 10 women who'd stood on that platform, most had settled into exactly the lives Black Ash Ridge had imagined for them. And what about me? Mira asked. What life did I get? You got the one you built yourself. The one nobody imagined for you because they couldn't see past their own narrow ideas of what a woman should be. Mira looked at her husband, this hard, stubborn man who'd chosen her when logic said he shouldn't, who'd fought beside her when the world said she wasn't worth fighting for, who'd loved her not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Thank you, she said. For what? For seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I mattered when I didn't believe it myself, for being stupid enough to pick the fat girl off that platform. Ronan smiled. Best decision I ever made. Second best was listening to you about that dam. They left Black Ash Ridge for the last time that afternoon. Mira didn't look back. There was nothing there she needed anymore. No approval to seek, no opinions to change, no demons to face down. That town had taught her an important lesson. That cruelty says more about the people inflicting it than the people receiving it. That being called worthless by worthless people doesn't make you worthless. The ranch waited for them, nestled in the valley where water ran clear and strong. The women they'd hired were working the fields, mending fences, living lives they'd built from the wreckage of other people's expectations. Every one of them a testimony that you could survive being told you didn't matter and come out the other side knowing your own worth. That night, lying in bed beside Ronan, Mira thought about the girl she'd been in Black Ash Ridge. The one who'd kept her head down and her voice quiet, who'd accepted loneliness as inevitable, who'd believed the lie that she was too much to be loved. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what she knew now, that the cruelest lies are the ones we tell ourselves after hearing them from others. That love isn't about being chosen by someone despite your flaws. It's about finding someone who sees your strength and helps you see it too. That taking up space isn't something to apologize for. It's something to claim proudly. But that girl didn't need her wisdom. That girl had already started the long, hard journey of learning it herself the moment she climbed onto that platform, despite her terror. The moment she said yes to an uncertain future because it was better than a certain loneliness. The moment she decided that even if she failed, trying was better than accepting defeat without a fight. What are you thinking about? Ronan asked in the darkness. That we turned out all right, you and me, against pretty steep odds. Better than all right. He pulled her closer. We turned out exactly right. And lying there in the house they'd fought to keep, in the life they'd built together from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to accept what the world said they deserved, Mira finally believed him. The ranch continued growing over the years. It became known throughout the territory not just for its success but for what it represented. Proof that the people society dismissed could build something that lasted. Proof that fighting back against corruption and cruelty sometimes worked, even when the odds said it shouldn't. Proof that the girl no one chose had always been exactly who she needed to be. Mira never became thin. Her body remained exactly what it was, strong and solid and capable of everything she asked it to do. She stopped apologizing for it, stopped waiting for others' permission to exist, stopped believing that her worth was tied to whether or not she fit someone else's narrow definition of acceptable. And Ronan never regretted his choice. Not once, not ever, even on the hardest days when drought threatened again, or money ran short, or the endless work of maintaining a ranch felt overwhelming. Because he'd learned what Mira had learned, that partnership built on respect and shared purpose outlasted everything else. That loving someone meant seeing their strength and helping them see it themselves. That the woman everyone called a mistake had actually been the answer all along. Years later, when other young men came west looking for land and opportunity, they'd sometimes ask Ronan for advice. He'd tell them about water rights and weather patterns and how to build something that lasts. But he'd always end with this: when you're choosing a partner, choose someone real. Someone who'll work beside you when things get hard. Someone who'll fight for what's yours, even when the whole world says to give up. Don't choose appearances. Don't choose convenience. Choose someone who makes you stronger by being exactly who they are. And if they asked about his own choice, about the wife who'd helped him beat Hammond's empire and build a ranch that thrived when others failed, he'd smile and say simply, "I chose the woman everyone said I shouldn't. Turned out she was the only one worth choosing." Mira's story became the kind that mothers told their daughters when they felt like they didn't fit, when the world seemed designed to crush anyone who didn't conform. It became proof that you could start as the girl no one wanted and end up as the woman everyone underestimated at their own peril. Because the truth Mira learned, the truth she lived every day in the life she'd built, was this: you don't need the world's permission to matter. You don't need to be smaller or quieter or more acceptable to deserve love and respect and a place in this world. You just need to be brave enough to claim the